Okay, here's one that I wanted to do for a year and a half now, or really over 35 years, about dogs. I recently, a year and a half ago, did one because a close personal friend of mine had a dog pass away, and it incited me to do one, and I showed some cave art into that. In this, there'll be a few pictures, and I wish somebody would just take what's being said here and omit this part, of course, and put a background to other pictures of dogs fading in and out, some video clips, and so on that might go better with it than what I'm doing. For I'm just trying to spit about knowledge, and in a picture while I'm talking about something like this really helps to convey the message sometimes. This is called Dogs, Guardians of the Afterlife. It's one of the tales of the tablet that I have here, and all these tablets that I have of old stuff that I wrote down, and quite often it's inspiration for videos, and I'll read through things and catch that with all the new thoughts and all the things that I've learned in the years past, and try to put it together and make connections for y'all in a video. In other ways, sometimes I'd like to read straight out of it, and this is one of those cases. I'll be taking about 5 different places, well, 3 different places where I wrote about it, clipping it together, and then having written now something a little more appropriate, little paragraphs, stuff that I stuck off on the side. It's one of the oldest traceable or trackable myths. Other than a sun that seems to set far off to sea or in the distance in the horizon, and a few astronomical connections, or the belief in a sky god, it's perhaps the oldest. It's the oldest we have connected to domesticated animals, and it's the oldest that we have actually connected to something that is real and tangible and that you can touch. Many cultures reveal that a dog played an important role in the journey and completion to the afterlife. A helper or guide spirit. In many cases, one would have to appease or get past a special dog, one that they were familiar with sometimes, to reach the portal into the afterlife. As a guardian of man, this close companion, one can easily see why this was in place, for the gods too had guardian dogs. When we look at ancient tales that people have of their spiritualness and connective religious beliefs, we can find pieces of this. This is just me cuffing it here. We can find religious beliefs that have a common connective. Sometimes you have to go back a few steps with people. Other times it's still evident. There's a lot of things that you might not never know that you never knew about Amerindians, and even about yourself and the people that you come and derive out of, and their ancient belief systems which somehow come through to a modern day. Some of them contain that same flavor that's going on with a little new twist, and if you know where to look whenever you taste it, you can still recognize it. Amerindians, too, had this symbology: a dog guide into the afterlife, or one that you had to overcome. Some tell of entering a spirit dog form, sometimes a wolf, and make this journey themselves. Then the meeting of the guardian dog would be on common ground, for he would be in wolf form. The Miami Indians believed in one dog, while the Shawnee Indians had 4, symbolizing the 4 winds, which attacked souls on the bridge of life. The Cherokee had 2 dogs on the path, one at a fork in the road that they had to feed, and another they had to feed across the bridge. If they did not bring enough food for both, they would be trapped in limbo effectively between the two. It's a reason for extra provisions and sacrifices and burials, they say directly. But one can look back at when people started to put things in burials for people that they would need in the afterlife. Quite often these are needed to even make it into the afterlife, to be a companion, and to make it through the process of resurrection and coming back. Eskimos, the Inuits of Siberia, among the Tungus, from which the Tunguska, as in Tunguska crater, an event that happened, are deemed, and the Chokhi also believed in a dog guardian of the afterlife. Now, these are people in Siberia, and that man's spirit would become a dog or be guided by a dog spirit to the guardian dog itself of the bridge to a portal. And that sounds strange because all the other ones I spoke of are Amerindians. The idea of a guardian dog of the underworld should sound familiar to people of Proto-Indo-European heritage. In Greek, Indic, Iranian, and Germanic myths, and later, and more loosely, Central Europeans in general of the Baltic area, there's also a collective mythos of a guardian dog guarding the gate of the afterlife, sometimes one dog, as many as 4, 3 being the most common, or a 3-headed dog. A triple aspect to life, it's written in the margin here, a triple aspect to life and even the soul of man. We see that quite often. It's in the Bible's aspect of a triad, and we talked about that and how that esoterically fits with things. We probably recognize this as the myth of Cerberus, the 3-headed dog that guards the way to hell or Hades, and the connectives with the Celtic goddess Hel, 1L, who took her dog with her into the afterlife, which is also a basis for this myth, and the fact that they have a protector dog there with her that we've already made the connectives in a few other videos before about that being the basis of it. Cerberus and the Indic Cerbera come from a common linguistics, Proto-Indo-European, meaning spotted or blotchy, and a word for patched, showing again clearly we are not referring to a wolf, but an ancient wolf of death does play into the Viking myths of the Aesir with Fafnir and the winter wolf, yet there are dogs. I always liked that this hound of hell that we all refer to, that we have to overcome, and a word for patches like the dog and the fox and the hound, or his name is Spot. Hey, maybe if any of us have to ever get there, and there really is a dog, it always helps to know their name, to have some food for it, or to have a kind gesture. But man, if you know its name. But I've always kind of got a chuckle internally every time we go through Cerberus and all these things, because yeah, that means spot. And so see spot run. If you ask somebody in a flinch, like they were on some game show and you had 10 questions to ask real quick, and you go, name a common name for a dog. Spot, even though it's not really as common as a lot of others nowadays, of course, would probably be the first thing out of people's minds and mouths. Across the Mediterranean, one can see dog burials, or ritualistic dogs at the bottom of a well, mainly associated with the goddess Hecate. She's the goddess of magic, or its corresponding equivalent. So if one wanted to find the root, we would look and should find similar practices in Proto-Indo-European homelands for both Amerindians as well as the Greeks and others of an earlier belief. Well, exhibit number 1, the Shurimaya culture at 3 to 4,000 BC showed, or 3 or 4,000 years ago to 5,000 years ago, showed an initiation ritual into manhood. It was the warrior class, referred to as the dogs of war, where a strict taboo against dog eating was performed through the whole culture and revered. Along with eating, but what was performed was a dog eating ritual, along with the eating of wolves during a winter ritual. These winter kill wolves and dogs are thought to be raised by the individuals as their personal dog spirit guide, who would meet them again as when they were children, once again, to lead them into the afterlife safely, and as long as a long-lost companion leading one to his ancestors. For now, they already knew the way before, because they had been there, and they would lead the way to you. This can also be seen in the Choreos, an initiation rite where the participants are said to have become a wolf, one of the pack, as one would say. Something else then. The famed mythology of Romulus and Remus, they were raised by wolves, means something completely different whenever you look at it as a phoenix representation of rebirth, or a story of coming into manhood and becoming part of the pack, finally. A lot of people have looked at some of their early fighting techniques and said that we derived fighting techniques or hunting techniques from wolves and things, where people would, as they noticed their prey, tell a few of these people without speaking. Usually they would end up with gestures, simple things, pointing and a couple of fingers and so on, like baseball, signals. And everybody would understand, oh, it's we're doing number 2B here in this one. What's 2B? Well, these guys are going to go down here when we go around here and try to catch it in between us. But these others are skirting around the whole way, and when we run them, it's going to try to run them into there, and it's all an ambush. Got it all figured out. It's just 2B, and everybody starts to do it. But this pack mentality that goes along with that is kind of telling too. And there have been people who have written lots of papers and such about the fact that not only did we domesticate dogs, but in a way they had a way of domesticating us, from us taking things from them and them from us, and then it recurring again. It's amazing, but hunting techniques like through the winter that we might have been sparse at somewhat, these guys already had figured out a long time ago. They were like, well, what are y'all doing? You can see this wolf here, and it's calling out. There are tales to be told of ancient rituals that these people would do, and they would howl like the wolves, and the wolves would show up. But they had their dogs. But whenever they did this ritual, and it was supposed to have coincided with the full moon and everything, and they did this howling, these wolves would show up. There are others who believe that whenever this first happened, that this wolf-like dog was coming close to man, smelling the fact that he had food through the dead of winter of doing catches, and that they would follow him around because they would live off the carcass of the thing that was cut and taken to the camp. And what was left they would divulge. So they always hung around leering, and in the process of leering slowly became friends. It looks like this actually happened. Well, you'll see a lot of people talking about this from different amounts, but it can go back as far as 60,000 years. And really, it looks like about 40,000 years there was a definite distinction between what we call a dog and what we call a wolf that was around. And there are people that argue that there's some signs of domestication that may have happened from a few different types that are even no longer existent, and some of their existing DNA rides on in certain species, and through that derived twist that can go on, that and hybridization has left us with all these different forms of dogs that we have today. Let's continue. These rituals were symbolic and horrific, turning the norm on its head. What was not allowed and taboo or forbidden was only accepted on this occasion to set up one's afterlife. While becoming a man, the power of inversion of sacred practices and rituals such as these are common across the ancient world. So they did something that looked odd, but people looking at it, and even psychologists and things, have looked into this situation and come up with the idea that what they're doing here was setting up for that dog in the afterlife situation, and that one that would just go ahead and lead him. Like later we find about the Egyptians and how they give them these scrolls and they already tell them what's going to happen in what order, and they've given them these things that trick their way through it, and so they should just make it right on through if they've done everything. The same thing happens to this, because one of the older tales that way predates the Egyptians by far, which had dogs by the way, was this ancient tale that this dog had to do with the afterlife and its protector and so on. And if you don't think you really see it or notice it in the Egyptians, Anubis is the dog and the protector of the afterlife and the protector of the burial grounds. He makes sure it happens. A portion of this concept became relegated to horses later, and horse burials and horse sacrifices and rites. In at least one case, a symbology that used to contain 4 dogs ended up sparking the 4-horse chariots, which now might be symbolized by 4-wheeled cars in a modern day. But the 4 cars of the apocalypse doesn't have that old biblical feel to it, does it? Which horses were new to the era in question? In which horses were new to the era in question, whenever this came in, which is useful in finding out what that was all about. Dogs are potent symbols of death and man's assistant well into the last ice age. But even now, with military dogs, and you see police canine units and so on, there's that concept that there's these dogs of war that we have going on with us. But we've had this all along, and a man that goes hunting, depending on what he's going hunting for, it quite often involves a dog. Whether he's helping to point out birds that he notices better than you, but silently points at them and lets you know, I see one, and it's right here, right there, and after you shoot him, I'll go get him. And then whenever he gets ready, and you get ready, and he's assured that you see what he's been pointing at, then he trees it, it flies up, and you shoot him with a shotgun, and the dog grabs it and brings it right back to you. Amazingly, too, I've seen people training dogs to do this, and action, and people hunting doves and having it go on. And in one instance, we shot 9 doves, but people watched where they fell, and the man that controlled them, with a toot of his whistle and the dog looking around just for a second, looking back at you in a second, he would point with his hand comparative to where the dog was. Just a simple hand gestures, and the dog rounded up all 9 of these real quick. He could only fit 4 of them in his mouth at a time, so he had to make a few trips. But we all thought that it was real fancy, but blowing the whistle probably kept birds from coming back so often. But no, man, about 10 minutes later, here comes a whole nother group of them, and the dog was like, oh boy, and you could see him get excited, like, y'all gonna pick up your guns, right? And that was kind of our symbol. It's like he was waiting for it. So now let's go back. We're back at 3000 BC, but can we trace this idea and concept further? Can the hounds of war and the hounds of hell sniff out the trail? Well, early Proto-Indo-European burials across the steppes are seen with dog burials along with them. Horse burials are seen later in connection with another wave of Proto-Indo-Europeans, and when found immediately, much is known about this burial and hushed tones of another rarely spoken of advance. But these earlier dog burials are symbolic. Many are posed sitting on the ground like Anubis or a Sphinx pose, many with tools left for them in the burials. One noted was kept with a polished stone left in its mouth. Even one where the dog's wearing a necklace, and that necklace had 4 red deer teeth on it. Dogs were seen as spiritually similar to humans, along with bears, deer, and other spirit animals. Kind of like Brother Bear, the Disney movie about Amerindians, and the story was told through the ages about a coming-of-age story, somewhat timeless, and in an ancient part of us all. Have you ever seen Brother Bear? And this idea that we'd have a spirit animal all within us and everything. Well, a lot of these spirit animals are all available to you. The one that's the Joker card out of the group, believe it or not, is a dog. Yeah, because you can get a bear hug, and we've tried to domesticate all kinds of animals through the time, and yeah, we've domesticated bears. Whenever I was a young kid and reading about this, there was Grizzly Adams on TV, and sure, old Gentle Ben there was fantastic. But there's as many horror stories as success stories with certain ones of these animals, including big cats and so on. I mean, cats and dogs, well, dogs seem to have been able to work it out, but also there was along with the domestication, there ended up being a hybridization with that's associated. This hybridization involved people taking some non-wolf that doesn't really come from a wolf. It's another thing. Like I've recently done a video about dire wolves and how they finally figured out that that's not really a wolf. It's kind of a dog, but it's big as hell, and it's kind of a bear dog thing. Well, truth be known, there are different types of wolves, and nowadays we see this gray wolf or a timber wolf, and we go with that, but those are a hybrid derived situation in what's left of it, and they've gone back and forth and bred with each other. There are some variations on a theme depending on where we're looking at around the world you find them, but to the visual eye there's not much difference to them, and archaeologically looking there's not much difference to them. Now, looking back just the last ice age, there was quite a bit of difference. In North America we had a huge wolf, something that's more akin to that stuff that you see in the vampire kissing movies and stuff, and with the dire wolves that we spoke of. So dogs were the companion of these spirit animals, the one that let you in to man's home, allowed to become a part of the pack. Man's best friend would lead, protect, and guard him even into the afterlife. I think of the children's movie, All Dogs Go to Heaven. Have you ever seen that? Now we go back further past the boundary of the last ice age, past pretty much any archaeology that you could find except for rare scant amounts, and we still find it. Past 24,000 years ago, in the grips of the last glacial maximum in this same area we're talking about, it's quite cold but dry, and snow dogs are already there. At Malta, in this North Eurasian steppes, are a portion of Caucasians known as early East Europeans, a genetic cluster now identified as a portion of early Caucasians in archaeological terms, such as the people I've shown with the animal bone huts set into the soil with mammoth bone archways and animal hides on top, an igloo teepee design. Before either, actually, in time, we think of teepees and Indians and things, and we think of igloos and Eskimos, and here's something kind of like that that predates both. In fact, it's about time we change a picture here. Gosh, I've had y'all staring at this and thinking about dogs. Here's a cave wolf. I wish they had a regular wolf next to it, because you'd see, well, oh, that's a lot bigger, and that's the concept of where that comes from. And that's how it carried down through mythology. And we have these ideas that this werewolf will turn into something bigger than a regular wolf, and dire wolves, and how they're set up with their head. And it's a little different. You have to look through all these terms they've got going on here, and where molars line up and so on, and what the size of them are. And they're saying, you know, this is totally different. This guy's lower carnassial M1 is actually larger than any other species, and his glendoid fossa is actually built with a slight bit of intrepidation to the end of it that isn't on any other ones. And also the material fossa seems to be a little bit more convex. And all these terms they come up with, and also my occipital lobe seems to be aggressed and a little bit distended from a normal position. Blah, 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 blah. What the hell are you talking about? It's a little farther back. Why don't you say that? So you can look at some of these jaws and fossils. This is Canis Variabilis. Well, that's kind of a weird, stupid name. Well, during this time, there was some variability into them, and Variabilis might be a name that you'd give during a modern day to a modern form of dog, because there's so much variability. But back then, there was enough variability on the planet, they decided to go with that. A lot of people have said Latin terms that doesn't really fit well with anybody's terms, but yeah, some of these terms they gave things, by the way, after the fact, well after the fact, they ended up finding more fossils, and it's all caused them to rename things and put things in other places. Again, one recent form of that is that all of a sudden, hey, this whole idea about dire wolves, it's not quite right. 2 years ago, we talked about how they were looking at jackals and different things, and they said, you know, this thing that we've always named this is not even a jackal. And these other two are actually closely related, even though they don't look like they're closely related. These two do, and it's some kind of convergence crap, and genetics shows you things that are different. Here's the skull of an Altai dog that's dated 33,300 years ago, and people have noted that this dog is already not just a wolf dog thing that's not a wolf, but it's a dog, but it's already got some changes gone on to it. No one can verify it had soft fur, and no one's trying to say that this thing is a golden retriever in any way yet, but it's quite deviated. And you'll hear, if you actually just look up the wiki on man's domesticated dogs here, you'll find Altai dog, and it'll tell you 33,000 years ago, and you'll see that keep getting repeated. But you'll find that by 23 or 22,000 years ago, they're telling you that, oh, well, yeah, it's well domesticated by now, and there's some variations on a theme. Again, what I was trying to say earlier is that by that point, now this variation is on a theme, develop in different places, and these people would come together, right? When they'd come together, before they even got a chance to meet together, these dogs would probably run off at each other and fight sometimes. Things would happen. But lo and behold, quite often they wouldn't. They wouldn't fight. They'd just run around and sniff ass like they do, And next thing you know, one would start trying to hump the other one as these guys came up and laughed or whatever. And it might help to be an icebreaker of situations. And in fact, what gave us some of the variations on a theme of dog variations was them trading dogs because of that moment, possibly. And hey, they're really getting along here. And so then those people who went back and then traded with other people and had dogs, and everybody liked that dog versus the weird thing they had. And now you're going to breed the weird thing that you have now that's a hybrid of this with the weird thing they have and end up with a fourth variation. And that's just in that direction. In this direction, we're going to end up with a fifth and sixth, aren't we? And it continues. And then over time, you can slowly try to go towards certain traits. A smaller dog, one that has longer hair, go for that golden retriever look in the hair, so it looks like a blonde, like like the women look like. And so the dog goes along and hangs around with the kids and all, and there's ones that start developing after that that have certain purposes for them. While they all can serve one purpose or another as a guardian in some shape, form, or fashion, there are other dogs that start to be developed real quickly at the form here of doing help in certain situations, and sizes start to change radically too. So we go back 24,000 years ago, and now Western hunter-gatherers split from Eastern hunter-gatherers, this is people, about this time, and or around 40,000 years ago or so. And Northern Eurasians kind of help hold the key to both later Europeans and Amerindians having the symbolic connections to hounds of hell and the guardians of afterlife. Western Eurasians and Eastern Eurasians have a deviation at 40,000 BC and again at 22,000 BC in the Upper Paleolithic genetics. And it makes up about 70% of their later Mesolithic Eastern hunter-gatherer mix, in which is the ancestors basically of the steppe peoples and eventually to all Europeans that we know today, and ancient NEHG or northeastern or northeastern hunter-gatherers and north central Asian Caucasian DNA makes up a portion of Amerindian genetics. Let me try to say that again from steppe peoples. So those ancestors, they become eventually pretty much what we know of as all Europeans today in that blend of that form. And it's deeper than that in actuality if we were to look at it as a separate video perhaps. But ancient Near Eastern or Northeast hunter-gatherers and North Central Asian Caucasian DNA makes up a portion of Amerindian genetics, up to 40%. In some cases, an X haplogroup is another marker. In the Americas, the lowest amount of Eurasian DNA is seen in Eskimo and Aleutians and Alaskan populations, as these are the result of migrations only about 5,000 years ago, while the earlier waves show higher Eurasian ancestry, such as in the Andes and the people that made it into South America, Mississippi cultures, Windover Bog, and many Amerindian groups, such as the Mandan, form from earlier waves that brought many cultural elements into the Americas, such as the swastika and other symbols, knowledge of the seasons, and though under a new sky, and the dog, the ancient North Eurasians were the first to cross over to the underworld, known as the other world, and they had dogs. We could quote and look at a few places where they've even shown and found this, and these primordial snow dogs in a few different places. But let's get back to that other picture when we're at this timeline here. Here's even a cave painting, and it looks like a weird barefaced dog kind of thing, and they say it's a canine type and not a wolf type drawing 19,000 years ago. This is a recreation of a mammoth bone dwelling. I've showed these same type of buildings and dwellings a few times. In fact, my favorite place to show them to you is in my Dungeons and Dragons game I play, because when we go to the north to do this whole fighting in the land of ice, the people living up there are barbarians and stuff, have little war dogs with them and stuff too that you have to fight. And there's some giants, of course, that go along with this mythology, and giant Viking boats. But the dwellings of all these people are made out of mammoth bones and the arches that all go around them. And recently I showed a video where just a couple of years ago they found up in Siberia one that was still extant. It was still there, and it kind of crumbled in, and the thing was huge. And all the archaeology that goes along with that. And that's not even a final paper. They came out to say, oh my God, look at all we find. We're going to come out with a paper with the final soon. And that's been about 2.5 years ago. It probably already came out now, and I haven't checked since. So we're going to go to part 2 here, but it's going to be at 45 minutes. So let me see if I can find a good, safe ending here. I only have one more page. So ancient North Eurasians, are known as ANE, are the ancestors of Amerindians, as well, partial ancestor of Amerindians, as well as modern Europeans in part, with some Northeast Asian ancestry, known as NEA. And so, in conclusion, the shared belief in a guardian of the afterlife comes like the swastika and much, much more before entering into the Americas. And this might be the oldest recoverable ancient myth in humanity. Well, it's the one the oldest that I can find, other than that cosmic beginning from chaos and a belief in the afterlife, or a flood, which seems to date towards the Younger Dryas event and would be later, or the belief in the sun going all the way around the world and dropping into the ocean perhaps, and popping out the other side the next day, are a few astrological events that seem to have the same connotation with them. Amerindians believe in a multi-part soul. Indo-Europeans did also. It's listed in a form in your Bible. The Egyptians with their Ba and Ka symbology, which is perhaps another connection with the domestication and subsequent variation originating at approximately 40,000 years ago in Siberia, the ancestors to the modern Amerindian Chihuahua, the Egyptian hound, and the canine dog, which the canine was named for, snow dogs, the companion, Shih Tzu dog, greyhounds, German shepherd, Irish wolfhounds in history, and the long-lived companionship of domestication of the dog and man itself is perhaps why there is such a strong connection. It is a product of their prowess and faithful companion. With cultural attachments to the protector and helpful hunter of the tribe, the dog, mankind's oldest faithful companion, the statement is made, all dogs go to heaven. He's the guardian of heaven itself. He's already there and paved the way. Look at a few more pictures here. Here's a group of wolves attacking a bison. And we are going to get through this in one, people. Amazing. I thought there was one more page after that. It seems I'm good. It's hard to believe that mankind, due to selective breeding and twisting, could do so much to animals. But you can see horses taken all the way down to micro ponies, up to different ones that serve different purposes. From a giant Clydesdale to quarter horses used in rodeos to, again, that micro pony. But we can see this micro dog here that's kind of like Toto or whatever, and then beside her is a giant cane corso. It's kind of the Italian version now of a mastiff, and that mastiff has connections to Canaanite hounds. And the Canaanite hounds we can trace back to a lot of other dogs that were in Proto-European lands from that point on, and a wolf species that was in the Middle East. It's another looking at a bite of it, but this one is the mandible of the oldest recognized dog. It's dated 14,200 years ago, and positively at this point, this is a breed of dog with a different jaw structure and mouth going on entirely. Here's a cave painting. It's only 3,200 BP, but it's a heron rock painting done. Don't know exactly where, but they're attacking a mouflon, which is a type of ram, and you can see the dogs in this jumping and attacking phase. Show it a lot in Egyptian art where they end up attacking different people using these Canaanite attack hounds. But there's also Egyptian hounds or dogs that's a little bit different than that. So there were other different forms at that one time. Here we're looking at types of sled dogs from a sketch that was back in 1833, and quite a bit of variation here. One that's almost all black, one that's a brindle tiger stripe, and one that's quite blotchy or spotted and almost looks like a sheltie, or it looks like, something that doesn't necessarily look like a snow dog that we would think of today. But of course the snow dogs we use today are derived from a time whenever they perfected the dog and knew the snow dog that was the greatest help and the one that could save you and make it through if things went awry and all that. So it started to become much more that husky style of dog, which is also perfected quite a bit, over time. Now look at this. Here's a Greenland dog, and it carries 3.5% genetic material inherited from a 35,000-year-old wolf from the Taimyr Peninsula of Arctic Siberia. Well, we look at Proto-Indo-Europeans, and we could probably end up and realize how that works. And then now it's been bred back into more snow dogish type dogs over here, and you can kind of see it's a mix of a snow dog and something else. Yeah, so you get these hybrids going on, and in fact, mankind itself is a product of a lot of hybridization that have gone over times, and then some regurgitation back on itself, leading to the different types here. But it's hard to believe whenever somebody looks at the wolf family portrait, or really the portrait in there should be something right before the step of the wolf, because the wolf and the dog are on separate branches like that. But looking in the way that we understand it today, it's hard to believe that the wolf makes all these variations of dogs that we see today as domestic dogs. But it's all been brought about because of domestications from humans that have become extremely good at it, not only with cows and horses and special types like that, but even birds, snakes, all types of creatures. Yeah. They became the master of beasts a long time ago. That symbology of the Sumerians and other people around that area that show that are because of before this time they long ago realized that they had this connection. And it's not necessarily a connection to where they're just a master and command type things off of it, but they're working in harmony for it, and it's making things work out for everybody a whole lot better. And it led to our modern day that we have now. It's hard to believe how much credit is not given to this animal that's a dog. I don't know if you have a dog, but if you do, maybe type downstairs what type of dog that you do have. This article is extremely long. If I was to go through this article, it would be about 4-parter, maybe 5 if I didn't shut up, and I say that, and I'm always short of the number anyhow. What type of dog do you have? Do you have a weird dog story? Let me know. But here we may see the realization of how the dog was really the man's helper in many other ways, in fact, into the afterlife, and he almost greets you at the gate of heaven too. Peace.